You think this is funny? The voice came through the phone like gravel dragged across wet concrete. Low, measured. The kind of voice that has learned over many decades that volume is for people who haven't yet figured out that silence carries further. Callum Reed never forgot those words. Not the night they were spoken, not the morning after, not ever. But 24 hours before that phone call, he was laughing. Laughing with 4 million people watching. Laughing while gasoline dripped off chrome and pooled on desert asphalt, and the comment section exploded with fire emojis, and the kind of all-caps enthusiasm that the algorithm rewards and the soul cannot sustain. He had no idea whose life he was about to set on fire. He had no idea that somewhere in Nevada, a 71-year-old man was sitting in a garage he had worked in for 30 years, watching a live stream on a phone his nephew had set up for him and going very, very still. And he had no idea that a 12-year-old boy named Danny was asleep in a house in Henderson wearing on the cord around his neck, a brass key that his grandfather had given him 2 Christmases ago. A key that his grandfather had said would one day hang on his belt loop instead when he was old enough to understand what he was carrying. That night, the key was still on the cord. By morning, everything it had ever meant would be ash. This is where it started. Not with the fire, not with the storage unit. It started the way most irreversible things start quietly, with a decision that felt like nothing at the time made by a person who had trained himself so thoroughly to mistake performance for living that he could no longer tell the difference between the two. It started with Callum Reed saying yes. Callum Reed was 26 years old and had never worked a day in his life, at least not in any way that the men who built this country would have recognized as work. He had 8.4 million subscribers on YouTube and another 11 million across other platforms in a penthouse apartment in Scottsdale that cost $19,000 a month and a talent, a genuine and carefully cultivated talent for making people feel like they were watching something real when they were watching something that had been engineered down to the millisecond for maximum emotional response. His content was simple. He bought things. He destroyed things. He reacted to things with the wide-eyed enthusiasm of a person experiencing everything for the first time every time, because that was what the algorithm rewarded, and Callum had learned early that the algorithm was the only boss he had ever had who could not be charmed in person. He had 8.4 million subscribers because he was genuinely good at this. Because he had a face that cameras loved and a voice that carried warmth, even when the warmth was manufactured, and a sense of timing that genuine comedians would have envied. He knew how to make an audience lean forward. He knew the exact length of a pause before a reveal. He knew that the comment section was not a conversation, but a performance venue, and that his job was to give the audience something to perform their reactions to. He had convinced himself somewhere deep in the architecture of his self-conception that this was a legitimate way to live, that entertaining people was a form of value, that the numbers represented something real. He had been telling himself this for long enough that he almost believed it. Bryce Harmon was 28 years old, louder than Callum, and meaner than Callum, and possessed of a self-awareness so limited that it had circled back around into a kind of confidence that people sometimes mistook for charisma. He had 3 million followers on his own channel and a habit of treating every human interaction as a potential content moment, which meant that he had never once in his adult life been fully present in a room. Bryce had grown up with money and had spent his entire adulthood performing the memory of not having had money, which was a particular kind of dishonesty that Callum had never examined too closely, because examining it would have required examining his own version of the same performance. They had been best friends for 4 years, or they had been the closest approximation of best friends that two people can achieve when neither of them has ever fully taken off the camera face in the other's presence. The storage unit idea was Bryce's. It always was. Bryce was the generator, the engine, the person who woke up at 7 in the morning with fully formed content concepts already running in his head. Storage unit hall, he had said, dropping into the chair across from Callum in the penthouse living room on a Thursday afternoon, but we destroy everything we find. Whatever's in there. Smash it, burn it, trash it, make it a whole thing. People go absolutely insane for destruction content right now. Callum had been on his phone. He looked up. He thought about it for 4 seconds. Yeah, he said, let's do it. The unit had been sitting padlocked for 11 months. Unit 31C at Desert Valley Self-Storage east of Phoenix. The kind of facility that exists at the edge of every mid-sized American city. Low buildings the color of sand. Roll-up doors painted the institutional orange of a place where function has never once competed with aesthetics. The kind of place where people store the overflow of their lives. Old furniture, holiday decorations, boxes of photographs nobody looks at anymore. The accumulated evidence of people who once had plans for things and then ran out of the particular combination of time and energy and intention that plans require. The manager was a man named Frank who had been running the facility for 19 years and who carried in his face the particular tiredness of someone who has spent 2 decades watching people abandon things they swore they would come back for. Frank had tried twice to reach the owner of Unit 31C. The certified letters came back unclaimed. The phone number was disconnected, and after 11 months of unpaid rent, Arizona law gave him no choice. The contents were his to auction. He posted the listing on a storage auction website at 9:45 on a Tuesday night. By Wednesday morning, Callum's assistant had already purchased the entire unit for $2,000 sight unseen. The production setup took longer than the purchase. Callum's team arrived at Desert Valley Self-Storage at 10:30 on a Saturday morning with 3 camera drones, 2 handheld operators, and a live feed that was already sitting at 340,000 concurrent viewers before Frank even produced the key. Saturday morning live streams consistently pulled higher engagement. Callum knew this the way a sailor knows wind direction, not as knowledge exactly, more as instinct, refined by years of paying attention to what the numbers do. The crew was 6 people, not counting Callum and Bryce. There was Marcus on the main camera, older, steady, the kind of cameraman who understood that his job was to find the truth of a moment rather than construct it. There were 2 drone operators named Kyle and Jesse who communicated almost entirely in hand signals. There was Benji, Callum's editor, monitoring the stream metrics from a folding chair with a laptop in the particular focused expression of a man watching numbers he considers sacred. There was the audio technician whose name nobody on the production team seemed to use or remember. And there was Silas Voss. Silas was 24 years old and had been Callum's primary cameraman for 2 years. He was quiet in the particular way of someone who learned early that the best strategy in most rooms was to keep your mouth closed and your eyes open. He had grown up watching his father disappear incrementally and then completely into debt and drink, and the specific kind of shame that accumulates when a man cannot provide what he has promised to provide. That kind of childhood makes a person one of 2 things. It makes them reckless, because if the ground can give way without warning, then there is no point in being careful. Or it makes them careful because if the ground can give way without warning, then you had better know exactly where you are standing at all times. Silas had gone careful. He noticed things before other people noticed them. Not dramatically, just in the way of a person who has learned that the details matter, that what seems small is often not small, that the thing nobody is paying attention to is frequently the thing that will matter most. He was the only one not smiling when Frank cut the padlock. The door rolled up with the particular sound of a mechanism that has been doing its job for years without complaint. Metal on metal, functional and indifferent. The smell reached them before anything else did. Old leather, machine oil, something metallic and dry like the inside of a toolbox that has been closed for a very long time. Bryce was already filming his own reaction on a handheld mugging for camera with the practiced spontaneity of someone who has been performing spontaneity for so long that the performance has become indistinguishable from the real thing. "Oh, it smells like somebody's grandfather in here," he announced, and the comment section exploded with laughing emojis. The unit was not large, 10 feet deep, maybe 12 wide. Along the left wall there were stacked cardboard boxes taped and labeled in handwriting that was neat in the careful way of someone who takes labeling seriously. Papers and photographs, tools and miscellany, riding gear, a small wooden workbench in the back corner with organized rows of wrenches hanging on pegboard, each one in its place. The arrangement of a person who respects order, not because someone told them to, but because order is a form of respect for the work. And in the center of the floor, occupying nearly half the available space, covered by a canvas tarp that had once been olive green and had faded over years to the color of dry grass, was a motorcycle. Even covered, the shape was unmistakable. The long, low silhouette, the width of the handlebars pushing at the canvas edges, the slight forward lean of something built for a particular kind of freedom, the kind that requires open road and clear sky, and the willingness to be fully exposed to whatever the weather decides to do. Oh, baby, Bryce breathed. He grabbed the corner of the tarp and pulled. The motorcycle was a 1978 Harley-Davidson Electroglide. It had once been beautiful in the way that working things are beautiful, not decoratively, not performatively, but with the deep functional beauty of something built to do exactly what it does and built to last while doing it. The chrome had long since clouded to a dull pewter. The black paint on the tank was faded and cracked, the original lacquer giving way in patches to something that looked almost rust brown in the single fluorescent light of the storage unit. The seat leather was cracked along every seam. One of the front turn signal housings was broken, the amber lens gone entirely. But the bike was still here, still whole, still possessing in some essential way that nobody in that storage unit seemed capable of recognizing an absolute integrity of form. It had been built to last. It had lasted. Whatever else had happened, that much was true. "It's a junker," Bryce said immediately. He turned to the camera with the wide eyes he deployed for enthusiasm. "It is a complete and total junker. What do you guys think? Should we trash it?" The comment section answered in less than 3 seconds. "Burn it. Smash it. Do it. Do it. Do it." Callum walked up to the motorcycle slowly. He ran one hand along the tank from the fuel cap toward the engine, and the chrome was cold under his palm, even in the February warmth. Cold the way things get when they have been sitting in the dark for a long time. He felt the texture of the faded paint, the hairline cracks in the lacquer, the small imperfections that accumulate on a surface that has been ridden through weather and years and whatever the road decides to put in your way. And for one fraction of a second, one moment, so brief that only Silas, watching through his viewfinder with the attention of someone whose job is to see things, registered it fully. Callum's expression changed. Something crossed his face that was not the performance. Something that looked almost like recognition or respect. The involuntary response of a person encountering something that has endured and finding against all the expectations of his carefully constructed worldview that the endurance means something to him. Then Bryce clapped him on the shoulder. "Dude, 2 million people are watching. Let's give them something." And the moment was gone. "Oh man," Callum said, the grin back in place, the pause expanding exactly as long as he knew it should before the reveal. "You know what this is? This is exactly what I love about this country. Some guy paid rent on a motorcycle he never came back for, and now it's ours." He let the silence build. He was genuinely skilled at this. The pause, the lean forward moment, the construction of anticipation from stillness. "And you know what we're going to do with it?" The chat erupted before he finished the sentence. Silas lowered his camera. Not all the way, not yet, just slightly, so the lens was no longer at eye level, so he was looking over the top of it rather than through it. He looked at this motorcycle. He looked at the saddlebag strapped to the rear fender, still buckled, the leather dark with age and use. He could see the shape of something inside it, a rectangular outline pressing against the leather of the left bag. "Callum," he said. His voice was level, quiet in a way that was not quite a request and not quite a statement. "Callum." Callum turned. "There's still stuff in the saddlebag," Silas said. Callum shrugged. "So we check it out first. Make it an unboxing thing." "That's not what I mean." But Bryce was already moving, already unbuckling the left saddlebag with the casual confidence of someone who has never once in his adult life considered that the things in front of him might belong to someone else in a way that mattered. He reached inside and pulled out the contents one at a time, narrating for the stream. Old rag. Boring. Tire gauge. Boring. Plastic bag. Ooh, let's see. He tore the bag open without hesitation. Papers scattered. Most of them landed on the storage unit floor. Bryce stepped on two of them without looking down. Registration. Insurance stuff. Whatever. He was already moving to the right saddlebag. Bryce. Silas said it with a flatness that made Callum look over. Not anger, not volume. Something quieter than both of those things. The tone of a person who has decided something and is no longer available for negotiation. Bryce stopped. He turned and looked at Silas with the expression of a man who has never once in his adult life been told no by someone he considered beneath him and who is finding the experience genuinely difficult to process. Excuse me. Silas didn't answer. He stepped forward past Bryce's arm and unsnapped the right saddlebag himself. His hand went inside. He was careful, deliberate. The way you reach into something when you don't know what you'll find, but you already understand that it matters. His hand came out holding a bundle wrapped in faded blue cloth tied with a piece of leather cord. The comment section had gone unusually quiet. Not silent. There were still thousands of messages running. But the tone had shifted in the particular way that a crowd's tone shifts when something real interrupts the entertainment. Something in the way. Silas moved the deliberateness of it, the way he held the bundle as though it had weight that he was responsible for, had translated through the camera lens to 4 million people sitting in living rooms and bedrooms across the country. Silas untied the leather cord. The cloth fell open. Inside were three things: a military service medal in a hinged presentation box. The felt inside still the deep blue of something preserved with care. The metal catching the fluorescent light, the way only real metal catches light, the kind of catching that is not shine, but depth. A Purple Heart. Even Callum, who knew almost nothing about military decorations, recognized it. Something in his chest registered it before his brain had fully identified what he was looking at. A stack of photographs held together with a rubber band that had dried and cracked from years of being stretched. The top photograph showed a young man in his late 20s sitting astride the exact motorcycle behind them, grinning with the full-faced joy of someone experiencing something they had wanted for a long time. He was wearing a leather jacket. On the back of the jacket, just barely visible at the edge of the frame, was a patch, a winged skull above block lettering. And below the image, barely visible at the bottom edge of the frame, words that the camera angle would not quite resolve. And a small leather keychain, worn completely smooth from years of handling a single word stamped into the leather in letters that had almost faded entirely, but could still be read if you held it at the right angle to the light. Ghost. Silas stood very still. Then he looked up. He did not look at Callum's camera. He did not look at the handheld Bryce was still holding. He looked at Marcus's main camera, the one with the widest shot, the one that captured the most. This belonged to a veteran, he said. He said it quietly, without performance, without the particular modulation of someone who knows they are being watched and is adjusting their delivery accordingly. He said it the way a person says something true in an empty room. The comment section changed again. Faster this time. Wait, is that a Purple Heart, bro? Put the stuff back. Guys, I don't think we should do this. Who is Ghost? Is that a real patch? Wait, don't burn it. But the people writing these things were sitting in houses and apartments across America, separated from the storage unit in Arizona by every possible kind of distance. They had no volume. They had no physical presence. They had only text scrolling past faster than anyone could read it. And in the storage unit, Bryce had already picked up the Purple Heart box. Military medal, he announced to the stream. Okay, so some veteran's family stored his stuff and forgot about it. Very sad, very boring. He set the box down on the workbench with a casualness that Silas would think about for a long time afterward. But here's the thing, chat. He turned to the camera with the slight tilt of his head that was his signature move, the one that said, I'm about to say something provocative, and I already know I'm right. Does that change anything? Does it? He waited. The chat flooded. No. Yes. Don't do it. He's a hero. Bryce is garbage. Burn it. Roughly 50-50. And Bryce heard only the half he wanted to hear, the way he always heard only what confirmed the decision he had already made. I say it doesn't, he said. I say a junker is a junker. Old dude should have paid his storage fees. He looked at Callum. You agree, Callum didn't answer immediately. He had picked up the stack of photographs while Bryce was talking, and he was going through them slowly. Not performing looking. Actually looking. The young man on the Harley grinning with his whole face. The same man older in what looked like a military funeral standing in a line of bikers that stretched out of frame in both directions. All of them in leather, all of them with their helmets off, all of them looking in the same direction with the expression of people who have agreed without words to be fully present for someone who can no longer be present for themselves. The same man again, gray-haired now, his face carrying its years, the way weather-worked things carry them with character rather than damage, sitting in a hospital room beside a bed where someone very old was lying. His hand holding the old person's hand. His eyes looking somewhere else, somewhere private, somewhere that the camera should not have gone and yet had. Callum. Bryce's voice had the edge it got when he sensed that the content moment was slipping. Callum put the photographs down. He looked at Bryce. He looked at the motorcycle. He looked at the number in the corner of his monitor feed where the concurrent viewer count was now reading 2.3 million and climbing. He almost stopped. Silas would think about this later. He would replay it. He would examine that moment with the careful attention of someone trying to understand how a particular thing happened so that he could understand what it meant that it did happen. And every time he replayed it, the moment was the same. Callum looked at the photographs and something real moved across his face, and he almost stopped. And then Bryce put his hand on his shoulder, and the moment closed like water closing over a stone, and Callum said, "Let's do it," and the thing was decided. They moved the motorcycle out of the storage unit and into the parking lot. This took 15 minutes and was harder than either of them anticipated because the bike was heavy in the way that real things built to last are heavy, the weight of metal and purpose, not the hollow lightness of something made to look like something. Getting it across the threshold and over the asphalt became its own small humiliation as the chat laughed at them. Struggling, and Bryce turned even that into content mugging through the difficulty making the inadequacy of the moment into entertainment. Silas did not help move the motorcycle. He stood against the wall of the storage unit with his camera at his side and watched. He had stopped filming. This was the first time in 2 years of working for Callum Reed that Silas Voss had lowered his camera while the stream was live. Nobody noticed. The drone overhead was getting the aerial shot. Marcus was getting the ground level wide. The production continued without him the way productions do when they have momentum and a goal and nothing has gone wrong yet, in any way that the people responsible for the production can see. Benji called out from his folding chair. Viewer count climbing. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Bryce retrieved a red plastic gasoline can from the back of the production SUV. He held it up for camera. He did the grin, the one that never quite reached his eyes. I came prepared, he said. And then Callum poured gasoline on a dead man's motorcycle. He started at the rear tire and worked forward. The gasoline darkened the faded paint where it touched and ran in channels through the clouded chrome and pooled in the gap between tank and frame, and the smell of it was sharp and immediate, cutting through the machine oil and the old leather and replacing everything else with the unmistakable chemical certainty of what was about to happen. The concurrent viewer count ticked past 2.7 million. Bryce was doing his running commentary. The chat was a continuous waterfall of fire emojis in all caps and numbers, viewer counts and timestamps, and the chaotic mathematics of a viral moment assembling itself in real time. Silas walked forward. He walked until he was standing directly between Callum and Marcus's camera. Stop. Callum blinked. The gasoline can was still in his hand. Silas's voice was not raised. It was the opposite of raised. It had the quality of something said in a room where the air pressure has suddenly changed, a statement made in the specific register of a person who has decided that the consequence of speaking is less than the consequence of staying silent. Callum, stop. Bro, you're literally on a live stream right now, Bryce said. I know. Silas turned and looked directly into Marcus's camera. His face was completely still. I know I'm on stream. I don't care. This is a veteran's motorcycle. That is a purple heart in there. That keychain says ghost. And you know what ghost probably means? Probably means that man is gone. He's not coming back to claim his things. He stopped. He steadied himself the way a person steadies themselves when they are carrying something heavy and need to keep their footing. You're about to burn the last piece of his life that exists anywhere in the world. The comment section went very quiet in the particular way that 4 million people going quiet simultaneously sounds, which is not silence but a kind of held breath that is worse than silence because you can feel its weight. The concurrent viewer count ticked upward, 3.1 million, 3.4 million. People were sharing the stream. People were calling other people into the room to look at their screens. Bryce stepped forward. Okay, are you doing therapy or are we shut up, Bryce? Callum said it without looking at him. Said it with the flat finality of someone who has just made a decision so small it barely registers, and so permanent it will take years to fully understand. There was a silence that lasted approximately 5 seconds. On a live stream, 5 seconds is geological time. 5 seconds is an era. The comments flooded and flooded and flooded. Callum looked at the gasoline can in his hand. He looked at the motorcycle, the dark streaks where the fuel had run along the chrome. He looked at Silas. We bought it legally, he said. It's $2,000 of storage unit contents, and we purchased it legally. And even as he said it, something in his voice carried the particular quality of a statement that the speaker knows is true and also knows is not the complete truth. The legal fact and the other fact existing simultaneously, and the distance between them being exactly the size of whatever was left of Callum Reed's conscience. Legal isn't the same as right, Silas said. Another silence. 3.9 million viewers. Bryce reached into his jacket pocket. He produced a lighter and held it up for camera with the particular showmanship of someone who has been waiting for this moment and intends to own it. Somebody's got to do it, he said, and he dropped it. The fire was not dramatic in the way that fires are in movies. There was no explosion, no fireball, no dramatic whomp of ignition that sends shock waves outward. There was a low, spreading bloom of blue and orange that moved along the gasoline trail with quiet efficiency. The fire doing exactly what fire does when given fuel and air, and the absence of anyone willing to stop it. And then the motorcycle was burning. The old leather of the seat caught quickly. The canvas saddlebags. The rubber of the tires began to smoke in the thick black way of rubber smoke, heavy and specific and impossible to mistake for anything else. The online crowd responded in all capitals. Silas turned and walked away from the camera. I walked back to the storage unit. He stepped over the threshold and stood in the doorway with his back to the parking lot, to the fire, to the drones circling overhead, to the 3.9 million people watching. He could hear the fire behind him, the specific sound of a thing being consumed. He could hear Bryce's voice doing his reaction commentary, the practiced enthusiasm of someone who has found his moment. He could hear the drone. He could hear Benji calling out viewer numbers with the reverence of someone announcing a score. Silas looked down at his feet. There was a piece of paper near the unit's threshold, one of the papers that had scattered when Bryce tore open the plastic bag. It had drifted to the edge of the doorway and lay there folded twice soft, from years of being carried, the kind of soft that paper gets when it has lived in someone's pocket or bag for a long time, when it has been part of the daily weight a person carries without thinking about it. Silas picked it up. He unfolded it. It was a letter. 2 pages, blue ballpoint ink. The handwriting careful and slightly formal in the way of a generation that was taught penmanship as a discipline, as a form of respect for the person you were writing to, each letter formed with the particular intentionality of someone for whom writing by hand was never casual. It began, Dear Danny, I know you're only 8 years old and won't read this for a few years, but I wanted to write it now while I can still hold a pen steady. Silas stopped reading at that sentence. He stood in the doorway of the storage unit with the sound of a burning motorcycle behind him and a grandfather's letter in his hands, and he read that sentence again, and then once more. And something happened in the center of his chest that he did not have immediate language for, something that was not quite grief and not quite anger, but lived in the same neighborhood as both of them, in the part of a person where the things that matter most reside, and where the violations of those things are felt most completely. He folded the paper carefully, precisely, along its original creases so that it returned exactly to the shape it had held for however many years it had been in that saddlebag. He put it in his jacket pocket, the inside pocket, the one closest to his chest. Behind him, 4 million people were watching a man's life turn to ash. Silas Voss stood very still in the doorway, with a grandfather's letter pressed against his chest. He made himself a promise he intended to keep. By midnight, the stream had been viewed by 11 million people. By morning, it would be 20. The comments were coming in not as celebration, but as something heavier, slower, more deliberate. The kind of comments people write when something has genuinely disturbed them, and they need to put the disturbance somewhere outside themselves. But none of that had happened yet. Right now, in the parking lot of a storage facility east of Phoenix, on a Saturday afternoon in February, a 1978 Harley-Davidson Electra Glide was burning. The chrome had gone dark. The leather was gone. The photographs in the left saddlebag had burned with everything else. The Purple Heart in its presentation box had survived the fire. The box charred, but the metal itself unchanged, because certain things are built to survive the things that destroy everything around them. Callum Reed stood 10 feet from the burning motorcycle with a red plastic gasoline can in his hand, watching it burn. He had expected to feel the particular release that destruction content always produced in him, the clean, simple satisfaction of having done the thing the audience wanted, done the reward loop completion of a content cycle executed successfully. He did not feel that. He felt the gasoline can in his hand. He felt the heat on his face from the fire. He felt the weight of 3.9 million people watching, and the curious fact that their watching, which usually felt like warmth, felt like something else entirely right now. He felt the ghost of that 1 second. The moment when his hand was on the tank and something real had moved through him, and Bryce had said, "Dude, 2 million people are watching," and the moment had closed. The motorcycle burned, the drone circled. Somewhere in Nevada, a phone was ringing. And in Callum Reed's chest, in a place he had not visited in a very long time, something that had been sealed for years was beginning very quietly and without his permission to open. He woke up famous in a way that felt different from every other kind of famous he had ever been. His phone had been vibrating since sometime around 3 in the morning. He knew this because he could feel it through the mattress, a continuous low tremor that had worked its way into his sleep and become part of whatever his sleeping mind had been doing with the previous 12 hours. He had silenced the sound at midnight. He had not been able to silence the part of his brain that kept returning with the insistence of a tongue finding a broken tooth to one specific moment, not the fire, the 2 seconds before it. Silas turning and walking away, his camera at his side, his shoulders set in the particular way of a person closing a door from the inside. The deliberateness of it, the completeness, the way a man looks when he has decided something and the decision has already become part of who he is. Callum sat up. The Scottsdale morning was already bright through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the particular hard brightness of a desert February that looks warm from inside and is not. He picked up his phone. He looked at the numbers. 22 million views, not total, just on the main clip that someone had edited and reposted overnight. On his own channel, the full live stream recording was sitting at 9 million, with the comments still open, and Callum made the mistake of scrolling through them for 45 seconds before he put the phone face down on the bed and looked at the ceiling. His comments usually looked like celebration, the particular warmth of an audience that has chosen you as their entertainment, parasocial and real at the same time, the way things are real when enough people agree to treat them that way. There were always critics, always a few people who showed up specifically to register their disapproval. But the baseline was warmth. These comments were different. They were slower, more deliberate, written with the particular care of people who are genuinely disturbed and want to make sure the words arrive intact. My grandfather rode a Harley his entire life. He worked on it himself every weekend in the driveway. If someone did this to his bike, I would not recover from watching it. You are not a person. You are a performance. I looked up Ghost Rider memorial associations for veterans. Men like this have raised tens of millions of dollars for veteran support over the last 30 years, riding to funerals of men who would have been buried without witnesses. You burned one of their bikes for views. I hope it was worth it. That cameraman tried to stop you. He stood in front of the camera and told you to stop and you didn't. Why didn't you stop? That last one had 47,000 likes. Callum put the phone down again. From the living room came the sound of Bryce's voice, loud, energized, already on a call at whatever hour. This was already doing what Bryce did best, which was treat every disaster as a content opportunity and every consequence as a temporary inconvenience on the road to the next moment of attention. The controversy is good, Bryce was saying. Listen to me. Controversy drives views, always has, always will. You think the people who are upset about this aren't watching, they're watching twice. They're sharing it to show other people how mad they are. That's engagement. That's the mechanism. We lean into it. We do a response video, not an apology, never an apology. Apologies are weakness. We do a response and Callum got dressed without announcing himself. I went to the kitchen and poured coffee and stood at the window and looked out at the city of Scottsdale going about its Saturday morning with no knowledge of and no interest in the particular crisis unfolding 20 floors above it. People in the streets below moving with the ordinary purposefulness of people who have ordinary things to do. The specific smallness of looking down at people who are not looking up. His phone buzzed on the counter, a text from Benji. Channel analytics through the roof. Two brand partners already calling about a controversy response sponsorship deal. This could be the biggest revenue month on record. Callum read it twice. He put the phone in his pocket and went to find Silas. Silas was not in the penthouse. Callum checked the guest suite, the production room they had set up in the second bedroom, the roof terrace. Nothing. He texted. No response for 11 minutes, which was unusual because Silas typically responded within 90 seconds. The baseline responsiveness of someone who understood that his job required availability. When the reply finally came, it was 3 words. I'm at work. Callum stared at this. Then he texted back, this is work, come back. No response for 6 minutes. Then a single word, no punctuation, no explanation, no softening clause to indicate that the door was open for negotiation. No. Callum stood in the hallway of his penthouse and looked at that word on his screen and recognized with the instinct of someone who had spent years reading audience responses and learning to distinguish genuine feeling from performed feeling that this particular no was different from any no he had received in recent memory. It was not the opening position of a conversation. It was a completed sentence. The period was inside the word itself. He put the phone in his pocket and went back to the living room where Bryce was still on his call. Laughing now, the relaxed laugh of a man who is confident in his assessment of a situation and is enjoying the sound of his own confidence. Bryce caught Callum's eye and gave him a thumbs up with the grin of someone who believes they have figured out the play and wants credit for the figuring. Callum sat on the couch and said nothing. It was Mara who made him understand the actual scale of what was happening. Mara Quinn had her own following of 4 million across platforms and a very precise understanding built over years of living inside the same ecosystem of the difference between controversy that generates heat and controversy that causes structural damage. She came out of the bedroom in sweats with her phone in both hands, scrolling with the focused attention of someone doing arithmetic, and her expression was the one Callum had learned over 14 months to read most carefully. Not the camera face, not the brand partnership face, not even the face she made when she was genuinely happy, which was different from the camera face, in ways that had taken him months to learn to distinguish. The other face, the one she wore when the numbers were not adding up in a way she could fix. Callum, she said. He looked up. Someone found the name. What name? The owner. the veteran. His name. She turned the phone to show him a post that had been reposted 14,000 times in the last 2 hours. It read simply, "The motorcycle belonged to Joseph Ghost Briggs, United States Army Korea, 1952 to 1954. Purple Heart recipient, founding member, Desert Riders Veterans MC Arizona chapter. Died this past March. He is survived by his brother Walt, his daughter Sandra, and his 12-year-old grandson Danny, to whom he had promised he would one day teach to ride that exact motorcycle." Callum read it once, read it again. The words 12-year-old grandson Danny and promised he would one day teach him to ride moved through him the way cold water moves through a person's chest. Not slowly, not gently, all at once, everywhere, reaching the places that are not prepared for it. "How did they find it?" he said. His voice came out quieter than he intended. "The photographs," Mara said. "Someone recognized the patch from the images Bryce posted before the fire. Old chapter members identified Joseph from the pictures. His daughter confirmed it publicly about an hour ago." She paused. "Sandra Briggs posted one sentence. She said that was my father's motorcycle, and he saved every penny he had to restore it for his grandson." From the living room, Bryce laughed at something the person on the phone said. Callum stood up. He walked into the production room and closed the door. He sat at the editing desk and pulled up the live stream footage. Not the finished clip, the raw feed. He scrubbed back to the moment Silas had walked into frame. He turned the audio up. He listened to Silas say, "This is a veteran's motorcycle. That is a Purple Heart in there." He listened to himself say, "We bought it legally." He sat with that for a while. The gap between those two sentences. The specific distance between them that could not be measured in words because it was not a distance made of words. Then out of the habit that had governed his life for years, the reflex that turned his hand toward the analytics dashboard before he had consciously decided to open it, he pulled up the viewer graph from the previous day's stream. I watched the curve climb from 2.3 million to 3.9 million in real time during the confrontation, during the 63 seconds between Silas saying stop and Bryce dropping the lighter. The machine had watched Silas try to stop it, had watched Callum almost stop, had rewarded the moment with 600,000 additional viewers. The algorithm did not have a conscience. It had an appetite. And the appetite did not distinguish between the kind of watching that comes from joy and the kind that comes from witnessing something that cannot be unwatched. Callum closed the dashboard. The door opened and Bryce came in without knocking, moving with the momentum of a man who has just come off a productive call and is carrying the energy of it like a physical object. "Okay, here's the play," Bryce said. He dropped into the other chair and spun it to face Callum, the ease of someone who has figured out the answer and is delivering it. "Monday we do a response video. Not an apology, never an apology. The internet smells weakness. We do a response. We say we bought the unit legally. We didn't know whose it was. We express that we feel for the family, but we also remind people that abandoned property auctions are a legal and established process, and we are not responsible for someone else not paying their storage fees. Then we pivot. We make a donation, something visible, a veteran charity, round number. We film the check, 10,000, maybe 20. We make it a whole. His grandson is 12 years old." Bryce blinked. Callum's voice was completely flat, the flatness of something that has been drained of everything except the essential fact. "His name is Danny. He's 12. His grandfather promised to teach him to ride that specific motorcycle. He had it all planned. He was saving money to restore it for him, and we burned it." Bryce was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then, "Callum, it's a motorcycle. It's a thing. Things can be replaced. We could buy the kid a new bike, a better one, actually, something newer, and we film it, we make it a whole moment. The redemption arc. People love a redemption arc. The metrics on that kind of content are stop." Callum said it the way Silas had said it in the parking lot. Quiet, final, pressurized in the way of something that has been compressed down to its smallest possible form and has no more room to compress. Stop talking about filming it. Bryce sat back. He looked at Callum with the expression of someone recalibrating, trying to locate the version of this conversation where the usual levers still work. You okay, no, Callum said. I'm not. I got up and left the room. Left Bryce sitting there with his strategy and his talking points and his fundamental inability to understand that some things are not content problems. He walked out of the penthouse and took the elevator down and sat in his car in the parking garage for 40 minutes without starting it. The parking garage was the only place in his daily geography where no camera had ever been pointed at him. The only room in his life that was entirely off the record. He recognized this as he sat there and found the recognition both clarifying and deeply sad in equal measure. That the most honest space available to him was a concrete room underground where nobody came. His phone rang. Nevada area code. Number he didn't recognize. He answered without thinking, the way you sometimes answer calls you would ordinarily ignore because something in the moment makes the usual rules feel suspended. Because you are sitting alone in an underground parking garage at 10 in the morning after a night that has made the ordinary rules feel insufficient anyway. The voice on the other end was older, not unkind, carrying the particular gravity of someone who has been carrying something heavy for long enough that the weight has become part of how they move through the world. This Callum Reed. Yes, my name is Walt Briggs. Joseph Briggs was my brother. The parking garage was very quiet. Callum's hand tightened on the phone without him deciding to do it. His mouth opened, and what came out was not an apology and not a defense, and not anything that had been prepared or managed or run through any kind of filter. I know who he was, he said. I found out this morning. His name, what he did, the motorcycle, what it meant, the boy. A pause from Walt's end, long. The kind of pause that is not empty but full of things being considered and decided. I'm not calling to threaten you, Walt said finally. I want you to know that up front. That's not who we are. That's not who Joseph was. Something in Callum's chest released slightly and then immediately retightened because the absence of a threat from a man like this was somehow more difficult to hold than a threat would have been. A threat was a known quantity. This quiet statement of decency was something Callum had no existing framework for receiving. I'm calling because I want you to understand what you burned. Not the bike. I'm not talking about the bike. I'm talking about what the bike carried with it. Walt's voice didn't rise, didn't crack, didn't modulate the way voices modulate when performance is happening. It was the voice of a man who has learned that the truth doesn't need decoration. Joseph rode that Harley to 47 funerals for veterans who had nobody. Men who came home and lost the thread of things and died without anyone present who knew what their service had cost them. Joseph showed up. Every time. He organized the rides, he made the calls, he put on his leather, and he rode that motorcycle to stand over a grave and say with his presence what the country had failed to say. He did that 47 times. He never talked about it. He didn't think it was something to talk about. He thought it was something to do. Callum sat in the parking garage and did not speak. He roadie ate to hospitals when men from his old unit were too sick to ask for company. He rode it in every weather through every year that was hard. And every year was hard, son. He slept beside it once in a parking lot outside Tucson because he had given his last $40 to a stranger whose daughter needed medicine, and he couldn't afford a motel room. That bike kept him company through things I don't have words for even now. And the last ride he ever took on it was to Danny's school play. Because Danny invited him and Joseph never once in his life said no to that boy. Callum's hands were flat on his steering wheel. He could feel the leather under his palms. He was paying attention to physical sensations with the particular focus of someone who needs something real to hold on to. The last thing I'll tell you, Walt said, is this. When we found out Joseph was sick, and I mean really sick, he didn't stop working on the bike. He worked slower because his hands were going, but he didn't stop. He had a notebook, instructions for teaching Danny, every step written down so that even if he wasn't there, Danny would have the method. He would have his grandfather's thinking even without his grandfather. Walt paused. Joseph made a promise to that boy. He spent the last year of his life trying to keep it with whatever he had left to keep it with. And now there is no motorcycle and there is no promise. And there is a 12-year-old boy who is carrying something he should not have to carry. I didn't know, Callum said. He knew as he said it that both things were true simultaneously, that he genuinely had not known, and that not knowing was itself a product of something he had built into himself over years. The deliberate incuriosity of a person who has learned that wondering about where things come from interferes with the content. I know you didn't, Walt said. That is the problem, isn't it? Another silence. What do you want from me, Callum asked. One thing, Walt said. I want you to meet me face to face. No cameras, no stream, no recording of any kind. Just you. Can you do that? Callum thought about what Bryce would say. Bryce would say, absolutely not. Bryce would say it was a legal liability and a PR trap, and if you go alone without a lawyer, you are out of your mind, and the correct move is a statement through management and a visible donation to a reputable charity and a pivot within 2 weeks. Yes, Callum said. Tell me where. Walt gave him an address, a motorcycle garage outside Las Vegas. He said to come within the week, and he said to come alone. And then he said one more thing before he ended the call. Bring something to listen with, son, not just your ears. Whatever it is in you that can actually hear something, bring that. The line went dead. Callum sat in the parking garage for another 10 minutes. He was trying to locate the version of himself that existed before all of this. Before the channel, before the metrics, before the careful construction of a persona designed to live comfortably in the space between entertainment and emptiness. He could not find that version. He was not certain it still existed in any recoverable form. He drove back up into the blinding Arizona afternoon. Upstairs, Bryce had been busy while Callum was gone. There was a new video on Bryce's channel already live, already accumulating views at the rate of something that is saying what a certain kind of person wants to hear. In it, Bryce sat in front of his camera with the practiced ease of someone who has been performing into a lens since adolescence, and addressed the backlash with the particular brand of manufactured directness he had perfected over years of public self-justification. Real talk, Bryce said on the video, leaning forward into the camera in the way he always did when performing sincerity. I feel for the family. I genuinely do. But let's be honest about something. If that bike was so important, maybe don't let the storage fees lapse for 11 months. That's on the family, not on us. We bought something legally, and we chose to entertain people with it. That's called content creation. That's the job. And if you don't like it, don't watch. The video had 60,000 comments in less than an hour. None of them were fire emojis. Callum watched 30 seconds of it. He closed the laptop gently. He looked at Mara. She looked back at him, and between them was the particular quiet of two people who have arrived at the same understanding simultaneously and are waiting to see which one says it first. He's going to lose everything, Callum said. Not with satisfaction, with the tired certainty of someone reading the direction of a wind that is already blowing. Probably, Mara said. She pulled her knees up on the couch. What about you? I walked to the window, looked out at the city, thought about Walt Briggs's voice and the specific quality of it, the way it carried weight without volume. He thought about Danny, 12 years old, and a brass key on a cord, and a grandfather who wrote down everything he knew about teaching so that the teaching could survive him. I'm going to Las Vegas, he said. Mara was quiet for a moment. Alone, alone. She nodded slowly. She didn't argue, which told him she understood more than he had said. She looked at her phone for a moment. At her own numbers, her own content calendar, the ecosystem she had been living inside for long enough that it had started to feel like the shape of reality itself, rather than a particular and chosen way of moving through reality. Callum, she said, when you come back. She stopped, started again. If you come back different, I need you to know that's okay. I need you to know I won't be upset about it. He looked at her, really looked not with the practiced eye of someone calibrating a shot, just looked at the person he had been with for over a year and saw perhaps for the first time with full clarity that she was tired in exactly the same way he was tired. That the exhaustion in her was not from working too hard, but from performing too long. That the face she showed the world and the face she was showing him right now were separated by a distance that had been growing for months without either of them naming it. "What does that mean?" he asked. "It means I'm tired," she said simply. "I've been tired for a while. I just didn't have a reason to say it out loud before now." He held her look for a long moment. Then he picked up his keys. Callum drove himself to Las Vegas. No assistant with the route planned. No Bryce in the passenger seat filling the silence with content ideas. No drone following overhead, and no chat window counting the people watching. Just Callum, his car, 4 hours of desert highway, and the particular quality of silence that surrounds a person who has run out of things to perform. He left Scottsdale at 6 in the morning before Bryce was awake, before Benji sent the morning analytics report, before Mara's alarm went off. He left a note on the kitchen counter, "Gone to handle something. Back tomorrow." The drive should have felt freeing. Open road, early light, the kind of February morning in the Southwest that is cold and brilliant and looks in the long horizontal light before 8 o'clock, like the establishing shot of a movie about a man in the process of becoming something better. Callum was aware of this. I was aware of the cinematic quality of the moment, and he was furious at himself for the awareness, for the reflex that was still running after everything, still tagging each genuine experience with its broadcast value, still asking the question, what would this look like as content, even in the middle of the thing that was specifically demanding that he stop asking that question? He turned the radio off after 20 minutes because every song felt like a soundtrack cue. He drove in silence and let the desert be the desert. Nothing more than that. The sky above it, enormous and indifferent in the way that helps. He got to the address Walt had given him at 10:47 in the morning. It was a real working garage, not a restoration boutique with ambient lighting and exposed brick and the carefully curated aesthetic of a place that wants to be photographed. A working garage, the kind that has been in the same location for decades and intends to be there for decades more. Oil stains ground so deep into the concrete floor that they had become geological features. The smell of metal and rubber and decades of mechanical work so present in the air that it was less like a smell and more like a fact about the place. Motorcycles were parked outside in 2 rows, 12 of them, positioned with the particular care of people for whom the way a thing is placed communicates something about how seriously you take it. Their riders stood in clusters nearby, older men mostly, 60s and 70s, built the way men get built when they have worked physical lives, not the built of a gym, but the built of years of actual labor carrying their weight with the ease of people who have never needed to think about it. Several of them looked at Callum when he pulled in and got out of his car. None of them came forward. None of them moved away. They looked at him the way you look at something you have been expecting and have already, before it arrived, decided how you feel about. Callum stood beside his car for a moment. I was 26 years old. He had spent years commanding rooms, commanding attention, commanding the emotional temperature of millions of simultaneous strangers. He had never in his adult life felt as young as he felt in that parking lot, as young and as genuinely uncertain about what came next. Walt came out of the garage. He walked without hurrying, medium height, wide through the shoulders in a way that age had not diminished. White hair cut close, plain gray shirt, jeans, boots that had been resoled more than once, a face that had been made by decades of weather and grief, and a great deal of time spent thinking the lines, not wrinkles, so much as records, a topographic map of a life that had not been easy and had not been avoided. Walt Briggs was 71 years old. He looked like someone you would trust with your life and like someone you would be very careful never to disappoint. He stopped 3 feet in front of Callum and looked at him for a long moment without speaking. Callum held the look. He owed the man that much. To hold the look without flinching, without filling the silence with something, without reaching for the performance that his nervous system wanted to produce. "You came alone," Walt said. "You asked me to." Walt nodded once. "Come inside." The other men watched Callum walk past them and into the garage. Nobody spoke. One of them, an older man with a long gray beard and hands that looked like worn leather, held Callum's eyes for a few seconds. The look contained an entire conversation. It was not hatred. It was something harder than hatred. It was the look of a man who has been keeping his own counsel about someone and has not yet decided whether that person deserves to hear it. Inside the garage, Walt gestured to a metal folding chair beside a workbench and took the one across from it. Between them on the workbench were a mug of cold coffee, a small flashlight, some loose bolts, and a brass key on a worn leather strap. Callum recognized it. He had seen it in Silas's hands in the storage unit. The keychain, the word pressed into the leather. Ghost. He had not noticed at the time that Silas had kept it. Apparently, Silas had found a way to return it to the people it belonged to. That small act of quiet correctness settled somewhere in Callum's chest, alongside everything else he was carrying. I'm not going to raise my voice at you, Walt said. He wrapped both hands around the cold mug. I did my raising of voices alone 2 nights ago, and it didn't accomplish anything except wake up my neighbor's dog. Something moved in Callum's throat. I'm going to tell you about my brother, Walt continued, and you're going to sit there and actually listen. Not for content, not because you're calculating the correct response. Because a man is gone, and what's left of him deserves to be heard by the person who destroyed what was left of him. Can you do that? Yes, Callum said. The word came out rougher than he intended. Walt looked at him for a moment, weighing something. Then he started talking. Joseph Briggs had been 19 years old when he was deployed to Korea, the youngest of 3 brothers, which meant something specific in a working-class Nevada family in 1952. It meant you inherited the toughness your older brothers had already demonstrated and were expected to exceed it. Joseph had exceeded it in ways nobody had asked for and nobody had wanted. He came back 2 years later with a purple heart and a new relationship with silence. Not withdrawal, not damage, though there was damage. Just a new understanding of what silence was for and what it cost to break it carelessly. Joseph made promises the way other men sign contracts, Walt said. He never said the words unless he intended to honor them, regardless of cost. His word was the one thing nobody could take from him, and he guarded it accordingly. Not as pride, as identity. The Harley had come into Joseph's life in 1978, the year after a stretch that Walt described simply as the hard years, the kind that either finishes a man or reconstructs him at the foundation level. Joseph had bought it from another veteran for $300 in a favor he never disclosed. He had spent 4 months fixing it himself, learning what he didn't know from books and from older riders who took him in the way the motorcycle community takes in people who approach it with genuine respect, rather than with the need to perform that respect for someone's benefit. That bike was the first thing Joseph ever owned that was entirely his, Walt said. No bank, no payments, no landlord, nobody's claim on it but his. He used to say it was the only thing in his life that gave back exactly what he put in, that it was honest in a way that most things weren't. Walt talked for a long time. He talked about the 47 funerals, men who had served and come home and lost the thread of things, who died alone or far from anyone who understood what they had carried, whose deaths would have passed without any ceremony at all, if Joseph and his brothers from the chapter hadn't shown up in their leathers to give them the send-off that their service had earned. He talked about the hospital visits, the medicine runs, the night Joseph drove straight through from Las Vegas to Tucson to reach a man who had called at 2 in the morning, stranded and sick and out of options, because Joseph had told that man once to call if things got bad, and the man had finally taken him at his word. He talked about Danny, about the 2 Christmases ago when Joseph had given the boy the brass key, about how Danny had worn it on a cord around his neck for 3 months until the cord broke, and how Joseph had told him that when the time was right, it would live on his belt loop instead. And Danny had asked how he would know when the time was right. And Joseph had said, "You'll know because you'll understand what you're carrying." Walt picked up the brass key from the workbench, held it in his palm, Looked at it the way you look at something you know contains more than it appears to. Joseph knew he was running out of time, he said. His hands were going. Some days better than others. He started writing things down. Instructions for Danny. How to learn the bike. Every step, every detail, every piece of thinking that he had accumulated over 40 years of writing. He wrote it into a notebook so that Danny would have the method even if Joseph wasn't there to deliver it in person, so the teaching could outlast the teacher. Walt set the key down gently. The storage fees were on automatic payment from an account that got frozen when the estate went into probate. Nobody caught it for 11 months because grief is disorganized and paperwork is merciless. That is how a man's motorcycle ends up in an auction. Not because his family abandoned it, because his daughter was learning how to live inside a loss that had no resolution, only accommodation, and the storage fees got lost in the learning. The garage was quiet. Somewhere outside, one of the motorcycles started briefly and then shut off. Nothing else. Callum had not moved in several minutes. He had been still in the way that people are still when something is landing in them that has nowhere to go but deeper. Walt said, I want to say one thing before you speak. The thing I actually called you here to say that I couldn't say on the phone because I needed to look at you when I said it. Callum waited. You didn't know whose bike that was, Walt said. I believe that. Your cameraman tried to stop you. I've watched the footage many times, and that young man tried. You had a moment, I saw it on the replay, where you almost stopped yourself. I've watched that moment over and over, and I've tried to be fair about what I see. Walt leaned forward slightly. But you didn't stop. And the reason you didn't stop wasn't because you're a bad person. The reason is that you've been living inside a world where nothing is treated as sacred, where everything is material, where the only question you ever ask about any moment is what it is worth to an audience. And that is a sickness, son. It is a genuine sickness. And you caught it young enough that you may not even know you have it. Callum said nothing. There was nothing to say that would not be inadequate. You burned something sacred, Walt said, because your generation was taught that everything is content. The sentence landed like a weight placed on glass. And for the first time since the fire, sitting in a folding chair in a garage outside Las Vegas, with no camera and no stream and no metrics and no audience, Callum Reed felt the full actual dimension of what he had done. Not the PR dimension, not the legal dimension, not the brand damage dimension, the actual dimension. A 12-year-old boy who had worn his grandfather's key on a cord around his neck for 3 months, a dead man's promise to his grandson, a motorcycle that had carried medicine and stood over lonely graves and slept in a parking lot beside a man in Tucson because they only had each other that night. Ash. All of it, ash. And he had poured the gasoline. His hands were flat on his thighs. He looked at them. They were shaking slightly, and he made no effort to stop the shaking. I don't know what to do with this, he said. His voice was very quiet. I genuinely don't. I don't have a framework for this. Everything I know how to do is wrong here. I know how to make a video. I know how to issue a statement. I know how to donate publicly and film the check and make it look like it's about the person I'm donating to. I know how to cry on camera. I've done it. I know how to make people believe it's real. He stopped. I don't want to do any of that, but I don't know what the right thing is. I genuinely don't know. Walt studied him for a long moment. The study of a man who has learned to take his time reading people because reading them wrong has costs. That is the first honest thing you've probably said in front of a camera in years, he said. Except there is no camera here. I know. Then maybe that is where you start. With the off camera. The door of the garage opened. Callum looked up and his entire body tensed before he could manage it. The instinct of a person in an unfamiliar place, suddenly remembering all the reasons they should have brought someone with them. But it was not a threat that came through the door. It was a boy, 12 years old, slight, wearing a blue jacket that was half a size too large. He had a quality of attention in his face that Callum recognized immediately, had seen it in the photographs from the saddlebag. The same steadiness, the same patience in the eyes of someone who has learned that what you miss by not looking carefully is usually the thing that matters most. Danny stopped inside the doorway and looked at Callum. Walt said gently, "Danny, you don't have to be here for this." Danny said, "I know." He kept looking at Callum with those steady eyes. "I wanted to see him," he said, quietly, without anger, without accusation, with the simple weight of something that has been thought about for days and has finally arrived at the moment of being said. I wanted to see the person who had burned his grandfather's promise. He wanted to put a face to it, to make it real in a way that he could carry it properly, in the way that a boy who has been taught that what you carry matters insists on knowing the true weight of what he is carrying. From his jacket pocket, Danny pulled a small notebook, dark green cover, worn at the corners. He set it on the workbench between them. He wrote everything down, Danny said. Every step. How to check the oil. How to feel when the clutch is right. How to lean into a turn without fighting it. He wrote notes in the margins, little things he wanted me to remember. He looked at the notebook for a moment, then back up at Callum. He knew he might not be there, so he wrote it down so I'd have it anyway. The garage held that sentence for a moment. Then Danny said, looking at Callum with the steady eyes of someone much older than his years, "My grandpa used to say sorry is just the starting line." He let the sentence sit. Then he picked up the brass key from the workbench, held it in his palm the way Walt had held it, and looked at it, and for a long moment the room contained only the sound of the distant highway and the old garage settling and the particular silence of grief that has found a witness. Danny closed his fingers around the key. Callum Reed sat in a metal folding chair with no camera and no audience and no algorithm, tracking the moment, and understood that there was no sum of money, no volume of subscribers, no viral moment in the history of the internet that could measure what was held in that small closed fist. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He did not look at it. He sat with what he had heard and what he had seen and what he was now going to have to figure out how to carry. And for the first time in as long as he could remember, the silence around him was not a problem to be filled. It was simply where he was and where he needed to be. He drove back to Scottsdale in the same silence he had driven out in, but it was a different kind of silence now. The silence going out had been avoidance. The quiet of a person running from the noise in his own head, putting desert miles between himself and everything that had happened. That silence had been empty in the way that running is empty, purposeful only in terms of what it was moving away from. The silence coming back was heavier, more purposeful in a different direction. The kind that settles into a person when they have heard something they cannot unhear and are trying to figure out how to keep living inside a life that no longer fits the shape of who they are becoming. He replayed Danny closing his fist around that key approximately 100 times during those 4 hours on the highway. Not because the moment had been dramatic. It had not been dramatic at all. That was precisely the thing. It was completely ordinary. A 12-year-old boy picking up a piece of metal in a working garage on a Tuesday afternoon. But the ordinariness of it was not emptiness. It was the ordinariness of something so fully real that it required no amplification, no production value, no audience to make it mean what it meant. Sorry is just the starting line. The boy had said it without rehearsal, without the particular modulation that comes from knowing you are being watched and adjusting accordingly. He had said it the way a person says something they were taught by someone they loved, carrying the words carefully because the words belonged to someone who was no longer there to carry them. And Callum had sat in that folding chair and received it like a blow he had not seen coming, which was the only kind that actually lands. He got back to Scottsdale at 3 in the afternoon. He sat in the parking garage of his building for a while before going up. He had been down here twice in 2 days now. He thought about what that said about where he was living and what he was running out of room to avoid. When he got upstairs, Bryce was gone. This registered first as relief, then as something more complicated when he saw what Bryce had left behind. The production room was half empty. The second camera rig was missing. Bryce's personal hard drives were gone from the shelf where he kept them, the rectangular outlines they had left in the dust making their absence more present than their presence had ever been. He had taken his equipment. He had taken himself. On the kitchen counter next to Callum's note that said gone to handle something, Bryce had left a response, not handwritten, printed from his phone, which communicated something essential about Bryce Harmon that did not require elaboration. It read, "Talk to my lawyer. We need to handle our channels separately going forward. Nothing personal. This is business. Your soul-searching trip is going to tank your numbers, and I can't afford the association. Good luck." Callum read it once. He set it back down on the counter. He stood there for a moment and felt something that he spent several seconds trying to identify accurately, because accuracy mattered here, because he had spent enough years performing emotions that he had learned to be careful about the difference between a genuine feeling and the shape of a feeling that seems appropriate to a situation. What he felt was grief. Not grief for Bryce exactly. Not grief for the man who was going to be fine in the way that people who have no capacity for self-examination are always fine, who would move to a new city and start the performance over and find a new audience willing to watch it. The grief was for something else. For the years of his own life, during which Bryce Harmon had been the person he called first, with any news, the person whose laugh he had used as the measure of whether something was funny, the person whose presence in a room had been the closest thing Callum had to the feeling of being known. And the full absurdity of that had not been apparent to him until this moment, standing in his kitchen holding a printed note that said nothing personal. This is business. He picked up his phone and called Silas. Silas answered on the second ring. The promptness of it told Callum that Silas had been expecting the call, which told him something about how well Silas understood the shape of things, even from a distance. "I went to see Walt Briggs," Callum said. A pause. "How was it?" "It was the hardest thing I've ever done. And I've done 72-hour challenge content with no sleep, so that's saying something." He stopped. The attempt at lightness felt wrong in his mouth, like wearing something that no longer fits. He set it aside. "Danny was there," he said. A longer pause. "The grandson." "Yeah. How old does he seem?" The question was careful, specific. The question of someone who has been thinking about the boy and wants to understand him accurately. "Older than 12, Callum said. "The way kids get old fast when something takes their person away." Silas was quiet for a moment. "Then I've been thinking about the letter." Callum went still. "What letter?" "The one from the saddlebag. It fell out when Bryce went through everything. I picked it up off the floor of the storage unit." A pause that contained something enormous. "I only read the first two lines. It started, it said, 'Dear Danny, I know you're only 8 years old and won't read this for a few years, but I wanted to write it now while I can still hold a pen steady.'" Callum sat down on the kitchen floor. Not a chair, not the couch, the floor. Just sat down against the cabinet with his back against the wood and his legs in front of him, and looked at the ceiling of his penthouse kitchen, at the track lighting and the expensive tile and the $19,000 a month of the life he had built, and listened to Silas tell him about a grandfather's letter. "I folded it back along the original creases," Silas said. "I've had it in my inside jacket pocket since Saturday. I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't want to mail it because it felt wrong. I didn't want to show up at the garage without knowing if that would be okay. I've just been carrying it. That letter needs to get to Danny," Callum said. He said it without calculating, without running it through any filter first. "I know. I have Walt's number. I'll call him. I can go back." "Callum." Silas's voice was careful in the particular way it got when he was about to say something that mattered and wanted to make sure it landed without being misunderstood. "You're not doing this to feel better. I know. I mean it. If any part of you is thinking about how this looks, about what they'll think of you for bringing it, about the optics of the gesture." Silas. Callum stopped him with the word itself, the quiet weight of it. "I sat in a garage today, and a 12-year-old boy told me that sorry is just the starting line. I sat across from his great uncle and listened to what that motorcycle meant and what it carried with it. I understand what you're saying." A long pause. "I'll bring it to you tomorrow morning," Silas said. His voice shifted slightly, carrying something different now, something that had been decided before this call and was only now being delivered. "And Callum, yeah, I quit." The two words landed clean and flat and final. "I know," Callum said. I should have done it Saturday. You should have done it a lot of Saturdays ago, Callum said quietly. That's on me. Silas was quiet for a moment. Then unexpectedly his voice carried something that was not quite warmth, but was adjacent to it, the specific register of honesty between two people who have been in close proximity long enough to see each other clearly. You were good once, he said, before all of it got too big. I used to think that version of you was still somewhere in there. A beat. Maybe it is. I don't know. But I can't film you finding out. He hung up. Callum sat on the kitchen floor for a while after that. He thought about before all of it got too big and tried to locate the specific moment when big had become too big. When the size of the audience had stopped being exciting and started being a weight he carried everywhere. When performing had stopped being a choice and started being the only mode available to him. He couldn't find the moment. There was no moment. There was only the accumulation of 10,000 small choices that each felt like nothing, and the sum of them which had become everything. His phone buzzed. A text from Mara. I'm at my parents' tonight. Can we talk tomorrow? He sent back yes. He put the phone down and thought about 47 roadside memorials. 47 times a man had put on his leather and ridden his motorcycle somewhere for someone who could not thank him for it. 47 times Joseph Briggs had chosen the showing up over the staying comfortable. And now there was no motorcycle. And Joseph was at his own final memorial. And the only person riding in his honor was a 12-year-old boy's grief and a brass key on a belt loop that had not yet found its belt loop. Callum made a decision that night. Not a content decision, not a PR decision, not a redemption arc decision in the sense that Bryce would have recognized the term. He made a private decision the way real decisions are made alone quietly without announcing it to anyone as a fact about himself that he was going to have to grow into rather than perform into. He was going to become someone who deserved the off-camera. I didn't know exactly what that meant yet. He didn't have a plan. He had a direction which was more than he had possessed since the fire, and he intended to follow it without filming it. Silas arrived the next morning at 9:30. He stood at the door with the letter in a sealed plastic bag, handled with the careful reverence of someone who understands that what they are carrying belongs to someone else, and that their responsibility is to deliver it intact. He handed it to Callum at the door without coming in, which communicated clearly the state of their professional relationship, while communicating nothing negative about whatever it was that existed between them beyond the professional. Tell him it was in my pocket the whole time, Silas said. Tell him I kept it safe. I will. Silas turned to go. Silas, he stopped. What you did in that parking lot, Callum said, putting your camera down and walking away, that was the bravest thing I've seen anyone do in this business. Silas turned back and looked at him for a moment. Something in his face shifted slightly the way faces shift when something true arrives unexpectedly. It wasn't brave, he said. It was just human. It was just what a person does when they see something wrong and haven't yet forgotten that they're a person. He shook his head slightly. The sad part is that it felt brave. That tells you everything about what that industry does to people. He left. Callum stood in the doorway of his penthouse and held the plastic bag with Joseph Briggs's letter inside it, and thought about the word human and how far he had been living from it, and for how long without noticing. He called Walt at 10 o'clock. Walt answered immediately. I have something that belongs to Danny, Callum said. A letter from Joseph. It was in the saddlebag. It fell out when Bryce was going through everything. My cameraman picked it up off the floor and kept it safe. I want to bring it to Danny personally. I know I don't have the right to ask for that. If you say no, I'll mail it certified, whatever you want. But I wanted to ask. A pause on Walt's end. The kind of pause that is full rather than empty, full of things being weighed and considered. He's at Sandra's place in Henderson, Walt said finally. I'll give you the address, but Sandra doesn't know you're coming. You'll need to talk to her first. I understand. Sandra is not me, Walt said carefully. She doesn't have 30 years of practice at setting grief aside long enough to have a necessary conversation. So whatever you're carrying when you knock on that door, carry it all the way in. Don't manage it. Don't perform it. Just carry it. I will. One more thing, Walt said. I've been watching what Bryce has been posting. Callum's chest tightened. He's not my partner anymore. I know that. I'm not concerned about him. He'll burn himself down. That process has already started, and there is nothing anyone can do to accelerate or prevent it because men like that carry their own accelerant. Walt's voice was level, almost matter of fact. What I'm concerned about is that there are 100 more like him, and they are all watching how this ends. They're watching whether anything actually changes, whether a man disappears from the public eye for a few weeks and comes back with a new angle, a new brand, a new performance of having learned something, or whether something real happens. Callum said nothing. He was listening the way Walt had asked him to listen, with whatever part of him could actually hear. What you do next, Walt said after the letter, after Sandra, after all of it, is going to mean something. Not to your audience, not to the numbers, to the actual people who are still alive and still carrying what you caused. Don't waste it on content. I won't. And then, because Walt deserved the fuller truth, because the fuller truth was the only currency that had any value in this conversation, Callum said, I've been thinking about the veteran garages, the ones that are running on nothing, the ones doing the work. Joseph did the memorial rides, the hospital visits, keeping the community alive for men who don't have anyone else. I want to do something real for them. Not publicly, not with cameras. Just put money where it actually does something and walk away from it. A long silence from Walt. Then, in a voice that had changed slightly, carrying the quality of someone quoting a person they loved and wanting to get the words exactly right. Joseph used to say that the best thing a man can do with money he didn't earn the hard way is make sure it arrives before the people who need it have to ask. Walt paused. He would have said, "You're starting to think in the right direction." The weight in Callum's chest shifted. Not lighter, different. Like something that has been held at arm's length is finally being brought close enough to carry properly. He got the address for Sandra's house in Henderson. He ended the call. He sat for a moment with the letter in his lap and his phone in his hand, and the specific quiet of a person who has just understood that the next door they knock on is going to be the hardest one yet. Sandra Briggs answered on the third knock. 51 years old, medium height. She had a quality of steadiness in her face that had clearly been built over many months of grief, rather than being natural to her, the particular steadiness of someone who has had to hold themselves together so many times that the holding has become structural. She was wearing a blue sweater and holding a dish towel, which meant Callum had arrived in the middle of something ordinary and domestic, and the ordinariness of the interruption made the moment harder rather than easier. She looked at him for 3 seconds before she knew who he was. He watched the recognition move through her face. It was not rage. He had been bracing for rage, had prepared himself for. It had decided that rage was what he deserved, and that he would receive it without deflecting. What crossed her face was something more complicated and more painful than rage. It was the expression of someone who has been waiting for something difficult to arrive and is almost relieved that the waiting is over, that the thing is finally standing on the doorstep and can be dealt with directly. "You're him," she said. "Yes. I'm sorry to come without calling. Walt gave me your address. I have something that belongs to Danny." He held up the plastic bag with the letter inside. "It was in the saddlebag," he said. "My cameraman kept it safe from the beginning. I wanted to bring it personally." Sandra looked at the bag. Her eyes moved over it, and then recognition arrived, and her hand went briefly to her mouth before she brought it back down with the deliberate steadiness of a woman who has been holding herself together for months and is not going to stop now in front of the person who contributed to the weight she is holding. "That's his handwriting," she said quietly, "on the envelope inside. I didn't open it. Neither did my cameraman. It's been in his inside jacket pocket since the day of the fire." Sandra stood in her doorway for a long moment. Behind her, Callum could hear the faint sound of a television and the background presence of a house in the middle of an afternoon ordinary, sounds that made the specific weight of the moment more acute rather than less. "Come in," she said. It was not warm. It was not unwarm. It was the voice of a woman who has made a decision and intends to honor it, regardless of how she feels about the making of it. The living room was lived in the way family homes become lived in over years. The accumulation of photographs and small objects and furniture that has been kept because it holds something beyond its function. School pictures on the walls, a frame containing what looked like a military commendation, a photograph of Joseph in his leathers beside his Harley that Callum recognized immediately and looked at briefly and then looked away from because looking at it too long in front of Sandra felt like something he had not earned the right to do. Sandra sat across from him without offering anything, which was her right, and looked at him directly. "Walt told me you came to the garage," she said. "Yes. He told me what you said, that you didn't know whose it was." "That's true. I believe it. I've believed it since the beginning." She paused. "That's not what I'm angry about." Callum waited. "What I'm angry about," Sandra said, her voice controlled and precise in the way of someone who has thought carefully about what they need to say and is saying it exactly as carefully, "is that it didn't matter to you. Whether it belonged to someone, whether it meant something, whether there was a person attached to it. You looked at that motorcycle and none of those questions occurred to you because you have been living in a world where things only matter if they matter to a large number of people simultaneously." She stopped. "My father was not famous. He was not important to anyone outside of the people whose lives he entered. But the people whose lives he entered completely. He did not do things halfway. He did not show up part way. And the reason you could burn his things without a second thought is that you have been living inside a lie, and you have been selling that lie to millions of people, and the lie is that significance requires an audience." The room was very quiet. "You're right," Callum said. Sandra looked at him. She had prepared for several possible responses. Agreement without qualification or defense was not among them. Something in her face shifted by a fraction. "I've been thinking about that specifically," Callum continued, "since Saturday. About the particular lie you're describing. That a thing is only worth preserving if enough people care about it at the same time. Your father rode that motorcycle to 47 memorial services for men that the world had completely forgotten. He understood the opposite of that lie better than almost anyone alive. And I burned his bike." Sandra was quiet for a long moment. Her hands were in her lap and she was looking at the coffee table between them. When she spoke again, her voice carried a different register, the register of someone telling a story they need to tell that has been waiting to be told to the right person. "He wrote Danny letters," she said. "He started when Danny was about 6. He said he wanted Danny to have his voice when Danny was older, when he was old enough to need the kind of things a grandfather says. He told me there was a letter for Danny in the saddlebag, a long one. He wrote it about 8 months before he passed when his hands were starting to go. He said he needed to write it while his handwriting was still clear enough for Danny to read." She looked at the plastic bag on the table between them. "I didn't know if it survived." Callum slid the bag across the table toward her. "Every word he said." Sandra picked it up. She held it in both hands and looked at her father's handwriting through the clear plastic. The controlled thing in her face began to change at the edges in the way of someone who has been holding a specific grief in a specific compartment and has just felt the door of that compartment shift. She did not cry. Callum watched her choose not to cry with the remarkable steadiness of someone who has made that choice many times in recent months and has become skilled at it. She set the bag down gently on the table, still sealed, as though she needed a moment that was not this moment to open it. "I'll give it to Danny tonight," she said. Callum looked at his hands briefly, then back up at her. "I know there's nothing I can give you that fixes this. I know that. I'm not here because I think I can fix it." He stopped. "I'm here because Walt told me not to manage it. So I'm not managing it. I'm just here." Sandra looked at him for a long moment. The tiredness in her face was still there. It was going to be there for a long time. But underneath it, something had shifted by a small and real amount, the way a room changes when a window is open somewhere. "My father would have talked to you," she said. "That would have been his instinct. To talk and to tell you who he was and to trust that it would land somewhere useful in you. She paused. He believed in people more than most people deserved. Callum heard that sentence and held it and understood that it was not a simple thing she had said, but a complicated one. That it contained both the grace of Joseph Briggs's character and the full cost of that grace, the cost of believing in people more than they deserve, which is paid sometimes by the person who believes and sometimes by the people who love them. He stayed for 20 minutes. Danny came in from the back of the house partway through, stopped when he saw Callum, looked at his mother with the look that asks a question without words, and received the small nod that said, "It is all right, I've decided." Danny sat beside Sandra on the couch. He looked at Callum. "You came back," he said. "I had something of yours," Callum said. He nodded toward the letter on the table. Danny looked at it. His eyes widened slightly, and then he processed it, the handwriting visible through the plastic, the familiar shape of his grandfather's pen on paper. And something moved through the boy's face that Callum was not going to describe to anyone ever. Because some things belong only to the people they happen to, and the attempt to translate them into language is its own kind of violation. "Your cameraman had it," Danny said. "I kept it safe from the beginning," Callum said. He walked away from the camera before the fire. He picked up the letter and put it in his pocket and kept it there until he could get it back to you. Danny absorbed this. "Will you tell him?" "Thank you, I'll tell him." A silence settled between them, the kind that accumulates when a great deal has been said, and the people in the room are deciding together without words what comes next. Then Danny said, looking at the table rather than at Callum, "I used to think I was going to be really angry when I saw you. When I thought about this moment, I thought I'd be so angry I wouldn't know what to do with it." "You have the right to be," Callum said. "I know." Danny looked up. "But you came. You didn't have to come. You could have sent money or whatever and called it even. But you came to the garage and now you came here and you're not filming any of it." He paused. "My grandpa used to say that who a person is what they do when nobody's watching. And nobody's watching right now." Callum held the boy's eyes. "I'm trying to figure out who that person is," he said. "The one nobody's watching. I think I got pretty far from him." Danny nodded slowly. He looked at the letter on the table once more. Then he looked back at Callum. "My grandpa could fix anything," he said. "Any part of any bike. He said the secret was just being willing to understand it before you tried to change it." He said it simply, not as a lesson aimed at Callum, just as a true thing about his grandfather that he wanted someone else to carry. Callum drove back to Scottsdale. He did not turn the radio on. I thought about Sandra holding her father's letter through a layer of plastic because she needed a private moment to open it. That was not this moment in front of this person. He thought about Danny's eyes and the brass key that would one day live on a belt loop. He thought about what Walt had said, "Don't waste it on content." When he got back to Scottsdale, he did not open his laptop. He did not check the analytics. He sat at his desk and opened his phone and started searching, cross-referencing the memorial ride organizations he found with the charity records in the geographic data and the names of garages that appeared in the same searches as Joseph Briggs and the Desert Riders chapter. It took most of the afternoon. He found the garage in Tucson at 5:15. It had been operating for 6 years on a combination of donations and the volunteer labor of veterans who came in 3 days a week because they needed somewhere to put their hands. The most recent filings showed they were 3 months from closing their doors. The number on the website rang twice before a man answered, the voice of someone at the end of a long day who has learned not to expect much from a ringing phone. "I want to make an anonymous donation," Callum said. "Can you tell me who I should speak with about doing that properly?" A pause on the other end. "Then, son, in 6 years, nobody has ever called asking how to do it properly. Usually we get a Venmo and a message and that's the end of it. I want to make sure it goes where it does the most good," Callum said. Another pause. Longer. "Come in," the man said. "Come in and let me show you around first. Then you'll know." Callum went in the next morning. The man's name was Dennis, 58 years old, broad through the shoulders, with hands that carried decades of mechanical work in every line. He walked Callum through the garage without ceremony, showing him the bikes in various states of restoration. pointing out the work with the matter-of-fact pride of someone who does not need to oversell what they are doing, because what they are doing speaks clearly for itself. He showed Callum the veteran volunteers, men who came in on Tuesdays and Thursdays and Saturdays because the garage gave them somewhere to be that asked something real of them. Men whose hands knew things and whose knowledge deserved to be used. Men who had come home from various places in various years, carrying things that did not fit inside ordinary life, and who had found in the particular community of this garage a place where the caring was understood without having to be explained. He showed Callum the wall. It covered most of the rear wall of the garage, a collection of photographs accumulated over years. Men in uniform, men on motorcycles, men standing at roadside memorials with their helmets off, men grinning beside restored bikes they had brought back from nothing, holding the handlebars with the satisfaction of people who have returned something to usefulness. Callum stood in front of that wall for a long time. He looked at the faces, the particular quality of pride that exists in a man who has fixed something with his own hands, the way people stand when they are exactly where they are supposed to be. Then he took out his checkbook. He wrote a check that was not a round number, not a PR gesture calibrated for maximum impression, a number he had calculated over the previous afternoon based on what it would actually cost to keep the garage running for 2 years without the pressure of fundraising, consuming the time and energy that should be going toward the work. He handed it to Dennis. Dennis looked at it for a moment, then looked at Callum with the expression of someone trying to locate the catch. No cameras, Callum said. No announcement. You don't know my name. It came from an anonymous donor who wants the work to continue. Dennis looked at him carefully. The assessment of a man who has learned to read people accurately, because the people who come through his door often need more than what they say they need. You're that kid, he said. The one from the video. Callum held still. Yes. Dennis was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the check again. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his shirt pocket with the deliberateness of something being kept rather than stored. My brother rode with Joseph Briggs once, he said. Memorial run up near Flagstaff a few years back. Said Ghost was the kind of man who made you want to be better just by being in the same parking lot with him. He tapped the pocket. This goes toward a restored bike. When it's done, we're going to ride it on Ghost's birthday. Every year. He looked at Callum. You're welcome to come. Callum thought about being welcome somewhere that had no camera, no algorithm, no metrics to track whether the welcome was genuine or whether it translated into engagement. I'd like that, he said. And he meant it with every part of himself that was still in the process of learning what meaning something actually felt like. 3 months passed. Bryce Harmon's channel did not recover. The video mocking the Purple Heart became the kind of statement that defines a person publicly and permanently, the kind that no rebranding or apology tour or strategic pivot can reach the bottom of, because it was not a mistake made in ignorance, but a choice made in full knowledge, and defended afterward with the confidence of someone who had decided that the only audience that mattered was the audience willing to keep watching. His brand partners left within 2 weeks. His subscriber count dropped by half in 30 days. He moved to Miami and started over, which was the kind of thing Bryce Harmon would always do. He would always find a new city and a new angle and a new audience who hadn't seen the previous performance. Because performance was the only mode he had ever learned, and he saw no reason to learn another. Mara Quinn quietly closed her accounts. Not dramatically. No farewell video. No final post with a long caption about authenticity and the journey and what she had learned. She simply stopped. Her last post was a photograph of her mother's kitchen table with 2 coffee mugs on it. No caption, no location tag, no hashtag. Her followers spent a week tagging her in comments asking if she was okay. She read some of them and was moved by the genuine concern in them, the specific warmth of people who had been watching her for years and had developed a real attachment. And she did not respond because some silences are the answer. And she was finally in a place where she could let a silence be what it was without needing to fill it. She texted Callum one morning 3 weeks after everything. Not about the channel, not about the numbers. She said she had started painting again, something she had done before the cameras, before the following, before all of it got too big to leave room for the things that had come before it. She sent him a photograph of what she was working on. It was the kitchen table at her mother's house. Two mugs, early light coming through a window at a low angle. He looked at it for a long time. Then he sent back, "I remember that table." She replied, "I know." That was the whole exchange. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was the kind of communication that had been available to them for a long time and that they had both been too busy performing to use. Silas Voss started volunteering at a veteran outreach center in Phoenix 3 days a week. He brought his camera sometimes, not for content, because some of the veterans wanted their stories preserved, wanted to speak into a lens, and know that someone would keep what they said, that their words would exist somewhere beyond the moment of their speaking. Silas moved slowly through those rooms and listened with the whole of himself, and the veterans could feel the difference between being documented and being heard. And they talked to him in the particular way that people talk when they trust the quality of attention being offered to them. I was good at it, better maybe than anything he had done before. The camera in his hands in those rooms was not the same object it had been in the storage unit parking lot. It was the same physical thing, but it meant something different now because he was using it for a different purpose. And purpose is what meaning is made of. And Callum did not return to social media for 4 months. When he did, it was different. No production team, no drones, no strategic partnership. A single camera on a simple fixed mount in the corner of the garage in Tucson, filming Callum sitting beside the bike that Dennis and his volunteers had been working on for the past 3 months, a restored 1971 Harley Sportster that had come in as a collection of parts in cardboard boxes and had been returned piece by piece, day by day, to something that could carry a person down a road again. Callum spoke for 11 minutes. He did not cry. He did not perform contrition with the practiced ease of someone who knows how contrition plays on camera. He told the truth, the specific, unglamorous, difficult truth about what he had done and why he had been able to do it, and what the cost of it had been to a family that had not asked to become part of his content and had not deserved to bear that cost. He said Silas's name. He described what Silas had done in that parking lot, standing in front of the camera, with his own camera at his side, saying stop in the voice of someone who has decided that the consequence of speaking is less than the consequence of staying silent. He showed the garage, the veterans at the workbenches, the wall of photographs. He did not explain the wall. He simply held the camera on it long enough for the photographs to be seen, long enough for the faces to be faces rather than images. He ended by saying the garage's name and the address in Tucson, and that if anyone wanted to support the work, they should come in person first and see what the work was and then decide. He posted it and stepped away from the computer. He did not check the metrics for 3 days. When he finally looked, the video had 3 million views. Not 11 million, not 22 million. 3 million from a smaller audience that watched differently than his previous audience had watched, with a different quality of attention. The attention of people who had been waiting without knowing. They were waiting for someone to say something real rather than something optimized. The comments were not fire emojis. They were long and careful and personal. People writing about their own grandfathers, their own fathers, their own moments of recognizing that they had been performing a life rather than living one. Veterans writing about what it meant to have their work seen by someone who had first demonstrated publicly and undeniably the cost of not seeing it. Older men writing in the particular deliberate way of people who do not often write publicly, but felt that this was a moment that required it. Callum read every comment, every single one. It took 3 days. On the morning of the fourth day, Walt Briggs sent him a text. An address and a time. Early morning. No explanation beyond those two facts. Callum arrived to find 50 motorcycles gathered in a wide lot outside Las Vegas as the sky went pale at its eastern edge, the specific pale that comes before the gold, when the dark has committed to leaving, but the light has not yet fully arrived. 50 men on 50 bikes, most of them weathered in the way of people who have spent decades riding in all weather and have made peace with what that does to you. The kind of weathering that is not damage but record. The accumulated evidence of a life spent moving through the world rather than watching it from inside something climate controlled. At the center of the gathering stood a motorcycle, not Joseph's. Joseph's was gone, consumed by a fire that had also consumed the particular history it carried, and that history was not replaceable and was not intended to be replaced. But this bike was something else. Built over 3 months from parts sourced by veterans from 4 states, men who had gone into their garages and their storage spaces and found pieces. They could contribute frame sections and engine components and chrome fittings, and a seat tooled by a leather worker in New Mexico who had ridden with Joseph once on a memorial run and who had heard about this project through the particular network of people who show up for each other without needing to be asked. The bike carried no single history. It was made of dozens of histories. It was beautiful in the unpolished, functional, completely authentic way that working things are beautiful, with no design element that did not serve a purpose and no purpose that had not been understood by the hands that put it there. Danny was standing beside it. I was wearing Joseph's riding gloves, the leather ones dark with age and use. They were too big for his hands, and he wore them with the particular unself-consciousness of a person who intends to grow into something and is not embarrassed by the distance yet to be covered. The brass key was on his belt loop, exactly where Joseph had said it would be when the time was right, when Danny was old enough to understand what he was carrying. And looking at him standing beside that bike in the early Nevada morning, Callum understood that the 12-year-old boy who had worn his grandfather's key on a cord around his neck had become somewhere in the months of grief and learning and carrying the boy who understood what he was carrying. Walt stood beside Danny. He looked at Callum when he arrived. He gave him the nod, the single nod of a man who has decided something and is at peace with the decision and does not need to explain it. "We ride today for Ghost," Walt said to the gathered men. Not loudly, he didn't need volume. The particular authority of a man who has earned the right to speak and speaks only when he has something to say carries its own amplitude. We ride for the work he did and the promises he kept and the ones he didn't get to keep. And we ride with someone who owes him a debt he cannot fully pay. He looked at Callum. But a man who commits to making installments on a debt he cannot fully pay is worth riding with, because it means he understands what the debt is. He nodded toward the bike they had brought for Callum. A simple older model, an honest machine, nothing showy. The kind of bike that asks of its rider only that they be present and willing. Danny looked up at Callum. The same steadiness Joseph Briggs had carried into every room he ever entered, beginning to find its way into a younger face still learning the terrain. "Ready?" Danny asked. "No," Callum said, "but I'm here." Danny looked at him for a moment. Grandpa said that's the same thing he said the first time he got on a bike. He said, "No, but I'm here." And his teacher told him that's the same thing. The engines began, not all at once, in sequence, each one adding its voice to the early morning until the sound was full and present and moving through everything, through the air and the ground, and the particular quality of light that comes just before the sun fully commits to the day. Callum got on the bike. He felt the engine under him for the first time in his life, the vibration of it, the specific aliveness of a machine that requires a person to be genuinely present in order to operate it safely, that will not be ridden by someone who is somewhere else, that demands the whole of a person's attention as the price of the ride. It was nothing like a camera. It was nothing like a comment section. It was nothing like a viewer count or a metric or the particular warmth of an audience that has chosen you as their entertainment for as long as you remain entertaining. It was just power and weight and the unmistakable sensation of being in contact with something real. Something that did not care how many people were watching. Something that only cared whether you were actually there. The convoy moved out of the lot. Callum rode at the back, which was right, which was where a person rides when they are new to something and honest about what they do not yet know. The desert opened up around them as they left the city behind the landscape widening in the way the American West widens when you move through it at speed, the sky becoming more sky. The distance becoming more distance. the particular quality of space that makes the interior of a person feel less crowded and more able to contain what needs to be contained. The sun came fully over the horizon. The light went long and gold across everything across the road and the desert and the chrome of 50 motorcycles and the leather gloves on a 12-year-old boy's hands and the brass key on his belt loop catching the first full light of the morning and holding it there, a small bright point moving through the Nevada landscape at 60 miles an hour. Callum rode forward. No live stream, no algorithm, no production team calculating the emotional resonance of the moment for maximum retention. No number in the corner of a screen telling him how many people were watching. Nobody was watching. And for the first time in more years than he could accurately count, that absence was not a problem to be solved. It was not a void where the validation should be. It was simply the condition of a moment that belonged entirely to itself, to the people in it, to the road beneath them, and the light around them, and the sound of 50 engines saying together what the men riding them had learned each in his own way and at his own cost about the value of showing up when it costs something to show up. There would be no video of this morning. There would be no post, no clip, no carefully selected still photograph with a caption about growth and gratitude and the journey. There would be no analytics, no engagement metrics, no conversation about what it meant for the brand. There would only be the morning itself and the men in it and the road, and Danny riding ahead of him with his grandfather's gloves on his hands and his grandfather's key at his hip and his grandfather's understanding of what it means to carry something beginning slowly and irreversibly to become his own. The Nevada desert opened up around them, and the light was everywhere, and the engines were alive, and Callum Reed rode forward into the morning. And in the specific silence of a moment that no algorithm would ever measure, and no audience would ever see, something that had been sealed for a very long time, opened fully. And it was enough. It was exactly, completely, finally enough.